The 2024 NFL Scouting Combine has officially come and gone. We talk about potential Ravens standout targets from the event and so much more coming up next year on this Monday edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher, the Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thanks so much for being here with me today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. Also in audio form, wherever you get your podcasts, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere. We're here for you. You can follow along, subscribe over there. We're 5 days a week, Ravens content, Ravens news, analysis, updates, so much more. I want to thank the everydayers, the people who are here for the first time, and if you're somewhere in the middle, I want to thank you as well. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. This is crazy to me. We're back. It's a Monday episode. We are 1 week away from the start of NFL free agency. Now, the official start technically is Wednesday, March 13th, so 9 days from now. But teams can officially start negotiating with players on Monday at noon. So we're 1 week away, and we're going to do a ton of free agency content this week. Might even do a bonus episode over the weekend about it because we have a lot to cover. But today we're going to be talking and focusing more on the Combine. It is Mock Draft Monday. So, of course, in the spirit of the Combine and of drafting, we're going to be talking about some Combine standouts and whether the Ravens should be focusing more on athletic traits and the RAS scores and everything. So we'll talk about who stole the show at the Combine, who could be targets for the Ravens based off of the winners and losers of the event. Then we'll get into the mock draft that I did for Mock Draft Sunday. We'll talk about it here today on Mock Draft Monday. Then in the final part of the show, we're going mock draft bonanza. We're going to get into your mock drafts from Twitter. Going to do as many as I can as we round out the show there. So let's just jump right in here for the Combine. Now, the Combine, I think the overall value of it has changed, in my opinion, over the years. I feel like with the Combine, teams really value athleticism, I guess, a lot more. Not that teams haven't ever valued it, but teams put a lot of stock into the Combine. A player can either increase or decrease their stock by a couple rounds at the Combine. So a player, like this is a lesser example of it. Well, I'll give two. One example, Orlando Brown Jr. He had a terrible Combine, and he was regarded by a lot of people as maybe like a late first, early second round pick. He dropped all the way to the middle of the third round. Baltimore took him. Kyle Hamilton was a consensus like top 5 guy, ran a slow 40 and didn't have that great of a Combine. He dropped to 14, and that was like a generational prospect dropping to the Ravens. So there are all these different areas and scenarios where a guy can increase and decrease their stock just like that in the blink of an eye. And I think we definitely saw that. I think a guy who really increased his stock was Quinyon Mitchell, the cornerback. I mean, the cornerback class is super deep this year. Now, the Combine also gives people an opportunity, like for team doctors, for example, gives teams an opportunity to talk to the player, examine the player in terms of just like injuries and what's their health like. So just getting a full picture. And for Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama, there was a foot injury that was actually discovered at the Combine. So a bunch of different things going on there. Now, I think a big, like, just positional group, I think positional groups like won. Like, there were players in the positional groups that won, but I think a bunch of groups won in general. The offensive line group was already considered, especially at tackle, to be one of the deepest classes of the entire, like the deepest division, I'll say, of the class. They certainly earned that. I mean, everybody tested pretty decently well. All the top prospects, I thought, did really good. Armarius Mims had a great Combine. Patrick Paul had a great Combine. A bunch of players there. Wide receivers, Adonai Mitchell was awesome there. The Texas wide receivers, I guess, kind of stole the show here. I mean, even have a guy like Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., right? Those guys all were Combine standouts. on the defensive line, you see like Brian Fisk, right? These guys who were like considered third round, maybe like late day 2, early day 3 guys, definitely increase their stock. On the offensive line, Troy Fautanu, who I think has inside-outside versatility out of Washington, he was a big winner. Talise Fuanga was another guy who won. There were, it felt like there were just so many winners. Like Cameron Kitchens was a guy who didn't really do well, and Braylon Trice is another guy who didn't, the edge rusher from Washington. But for Baltimore, I think they're starting to value athleticism a lot here. Not that they hadn't, but in my opinion, I don't know. It feels like they're not going to take a guy like a Brandon Dorless example from Oregon because his testing was not great. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to take chances on guys who had poor combines. I mean, they've done it. I just mentioned 2 examples pretty recently, but I still think Baltimore does have an opportunity to maybe pick up a steal here and there of a guy that didn't have a wonderful combine. Now, I think there was inconsistent, like the quarterback position is not going to matter. So I know there's been a lot of buzz about like a JJ McCarthy or Bo Nix. Spencer Rattler didn't really have a great day, but that's not going to matter for the Ravens. But then you talk about like the running back position, for example, like that's a position that's going to matter. For example, defensive line, I mentioned Braden Fisk. He's a guy that I think is going to be he's a target potentially to watch for the Ravens. And in my opinion, I mean, you got a lot of different avenues you could go. If you're Baltimore, like you could go maybe a Chop Robinson, which hint for the second part of the show, maybe Chop Robinson is a name you want to keep an eye on there. But you also, speaking of like wide receivers who are in Baltimore's range, Brian Thomas is going to be in their range. Xavier Worthy is going to be in their range. Keon Coleman, he had flashes. I thought that, he was solid enough. I mean, Ricky Purcell also was solid enough. Troy Franklin out of Oregon was a guy that I, was in that, like, some people are like him as like a back end first round prospect. Other guys like him as more of a second, third round. He was not a winner. So he's the guy that maybe if people were targeting him at 30, maybe his stock dropped into the 60s. But then what about like an Isaac Gurendo? That's a guy that for me out of Louisville could be an option. He scored a 9.98 on the RAS, which means relative athletic score. So pretty much if you don't know what RAS is, it's a bunch of composite grades. So size grade, speed grade, explosion grade, agility grade. So it factors in your height, your weight, your vertical, your 40-yard, or your testing drills. Gurendo finished 9.98, ranked 5th out of 1,765 running backs just ever. Incredible. So there are positionally, we've talked about it here on the show, just about like where the Ravens should go and how they should kind of attack the draft and what types of players they should be looking for. Athleticism is not the be all end all, right? A guy can be a really good athlete, but just not have other traits or other tools to play in the league. A guy cannot be a great athlete, not have a great combine. And they can, on the flip side, they can be that guy. They can be a star. So I'm not going to just box in these guys as, oh, they're an athlete, they can play. Or they're not an athlete, they can't play. That's not how it goes. So like Xavier Legette is a guy that I think a lot of people love out of South Carolina. He improved his stock a bunch. Tez Walker, Theo Johnson as a tight end position, Trey Benson, that's a guy. Maybe Marshawn Lloyd as well. They have just all over the place. I thought we saw a lot of combine winners, not a ton of combine losers. Not that there weren't any combine losers, but I think this was a good day, good couple of days for the combine. I don't necessarily know the value in terms of how important the combine will be moving forward, because I think, again, if a team likes a prospect, they're going to look past I'll say they look past some stuff, right? But that doesn't mean they're going to look past everything. Baltimore look past the bad combine from Orlando Brown. Look past a bad combine or a bad 40 time from Kyle Hamilton. So it just depends on the prospect. But obviously, the combine gives you a holistic perspective of how they test and, how they are medically, how they interview. So it's everything combined into one. So a lot of winners. And coming up with the second part of the show, we'll talk about the mock draft that I did, mainly with combine winners. So be sure to stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bet for anyone $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more, because basketball's in full swing right now. No more football, unfortunately. Baseball coming in right behind basketball there, so I'm a big Denver Nuggets fan. Nikola Jokic is a guy that I think you could really do well on. Maybe Jamal Murray, even you want to pick over points as he gets closer to playoff mode. Jamal Murray is going to be a problem. So visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. We're going to dive into a mock draft Monday, as we always do here on Locked On Ravens. And I always try to do a different theme and, for the most part, take different prospects so we can talk about them here on the show. So with the combine being kind of the theme of this whole thing, I did want to focus on mainly combine standouts. And with the first pick here, number 30, I took Chop Robinson. Edge out of Penn State, there was a lot of conversation. He was talking about how he wants to sack Lamar Jackson. He's local. He's a Maryland guy, grew up in Maryland, and grew up rooting for the Ravens. And talked about how he, again, wants to get that sack against Lamar Jackson, how he's doing one of the hardest guys to bring down, but it's going to be hard if he's on the same team as Lamar Jackson, maybe like a practice thing. Now, Robinson's stats won't necessarily impress you. He's not someone that you're going to look at and say, oh, yeah, 30 sacks in college. Only 11 and a half sacks. He started off at Maryland, obviously, and then transferred over to Penn State. And 11 and a half sacks, again, his career high is his sophomore year. Was 5.5, only had 4 last season, but the traits are there. The intangibles are there. And obviously with an athlete like that and a guy like Chuck Smith in that room, for example, I think you got to feel confident in what the potential is. Now, I know some people say, oh, another Penn State pass rusher. And I've always been so inconsistent. I feel like Chop Robinson is a guy that, again, always hasn't been bad. It's just been like the inconsistencies have been there. I think Robinson will be an awesome addition. The Ravens do need to think about what their future at the edge position is going to look like, because David Ojabo, obviously not a sure thing. Owe, the flashes are there, but he is also not a sure thing. And then Kyle Van Noy, David and Clowney, they're free agents. I'm not gonna assume both of them are gonna be back, because we don't know anything right now. I do these based off of who's on the roster right now and who is not. I think edge is a perfectly good need for them to take in the first round there. Then at number 62, I took Patrick Paul out of Houston. He had an awesome combine. He's one of those players where, again, I don't think he's going to be available at 62. His combine kind of solidified that. But look, if the mock draft simulator gives it, you got to take it. So I think for me, Paul would be an incredible addition, and it kind of lessens the blow. I've talked about this before on the show, but if you take a guy in the first round, I want to, if I'm the Ravens, I want to have that guy play. Because the Ravens are in a position right now where they need as much or as many contributions as they can get out of whoever they can get it out of. And a first-round prospect, obviously, that's a really big asset to your team. But if you keep Ronnie Stanley and you keep Morgan Moses and then you take a first-round tackle, that guy might sit behind those two, and then you're wasting out on getting good contributions from a really talented rookie. So if you, for example, like a Troy Fautanu, he can kick inside to guard. I'd be okay with that pick as a first rounder. But for a Patrick Paul, if you take Chop Robinson, then Patrick Paul, I would be more okay, I guess. Still wouldn't be ideal, because you can still get really good contributions out of a second round pick. But really, it's better to have a second round pick sitting behind Ronnie Stanley or Morgan Moses than a first round pick sitting behind Ronnie Stanley or Morgan Moses. So Paul is someone who could honestly go at the end of the first round. He is super physical, can get it into space really well. So I think he'd be a really good fit for this offense. It could be a future cornerstone for them they get there at number 62. Then at number 93, I took Peyton Wilson, linebacker out of NC State. Now, he's an off-ball linebacker. It's not a need for the Ravens, right? Technically, if you don't believe in Trenton Simpson, maybe it is for you. But I took Peyton Wilson solely because, he's not going to be anywhere near. He's going to get taken very, very, very much so earlier than this. So this was a best player available pick for me. And again, we've had this conversation. We had it actually last week about, can the Ravens afford to take best player availables with how many needs they have? Can they afford to take a Peyton Wilson instead of maybe a corner at this spot or a wide receiver at this spot? I think it's possible because, again, two needs were addressed with the first two picks, and we do know the Ravens love the best player available strategy. Peyton Wilson is somebody who has speed, has athleticism, super physical. So I think, again, he's a three-tool player, and I mean that in the best way. I guess you can call it five-tool player if you want to. He's a five-tool player, and I think he has a lot of potential. Plus, Trenton Simpson's not a sure thing. Like, I believe in him, but Trenton Simpson's not necessarily a sure thing. I don't think the Ravens take a linebacker this high because they did invest a third-round pick in Trenton Simpson. So investing a third-round pick 2 years in a row on a linebacker when you have a lot of other needs, I get it. I do. But Wilson was awesome at the combine, and I think he's going to have a bright future ahead of him. So, look, best player available. You have a chance to take a really good football player. The Ravens have done that time and time again. Jermaine Burton out of Alabama was my fourth-round selection here at number 131. Had a good combine, ran around a 4.4. So he's a speedster, and he's a taller player, can make contested catches. Now, after the catch, it's not like amazing from him. Like, he can make stuff happen, but I think it's like he gets the ball, he comes down with it, and then, okay, what do we do now? So I think Burton would be a really solid mid-round wide receiver pick, especially if Baltimore decides to go out and maybe sign a veteran in free agency. So then you do have Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, someone else, like, a proven guy. And then you go and you take a Jermaine Burton, for example. So I'm okay with this pick. I think it's a solid value pick as well. He's expected to go more so towards the third round. Jordan Jefferson out of LSU, the defensive lineman. It's a different Jay Jefferson out of LSU, not Justin. But Jordan Jefferson at LSU, he put up the most bench press reps. I believe that was 34. I don't have the number in front of me right now, but 34 on the bench press. It was out of 32 or 34, but he was strong, man, in it. Best rep count on the day from defensive linemen. He's a strong dude, can move people out of the way, a force in the run game. Baltimore does have, it's not necessarily a need for him, especially if they re-sign Justin Madubuike. But with Michael Pierce potentially not being there after next year, what's the status of Brent Urban? You still have a really solid group of young guys in Madubuike, Broderick Washington, and Travis Jones, but going to need some other depth, and we're going to see how it plays out for him there. Now, MJ Devonshire out of Pittsburgh was my pick here. I should have taken Jarvis Brownlee. He was here, and I didn't realize he was there because he's a guy that's like a second to third round prospect. He was available at 164, and I didn't notice until he was like, the mock draft ticker goes and goes and goes, and I didn't even realize he was there until he was gone. So I should have taken Brownlee, but I like MJ Devonshire a lot. He's someone who won special teams experience in terms of actually returning punts. So with the Ravens punt return situation a little up in the air, maybe Devonshire can do that, but he has the physical frame to play both on the outside, or you can play him in the slot as well. Ball production was there for him at Pittsburgh, and for me, I think that this would be an underrated pick for them. I feel like everybody's looking, and there are a lot of great corners in the first and second rounds here. I personally, my preference would be to take a corner in the first round, but I think there are a lot of mid to late round corner prospects I'd be totally fine with, and Devonshire is one of those guys. Kamani Vidal out of Troy was my pick at 226, a running back. I feel like this is where people would like to see a running back taken, not necessarily a Corum in the third round or a Ray Davis, et cetera, et cetera. But Vidal is someone who has speed, athleticism, had a really good combine. Now, of course, the question with him being from Troy, is the production going to translate to the next level? We're going to have to see about that. But I think picking a running back here actually fits the Ravens' plan. It may be what I expect them to do at running back pretty well because, and I've said this before on the show, if you're an everyday, you've heard me talk about it a lot. I think what they're going to do is they're going to sign a veteran. Let's just say it's Derrick Henry for now. They sign a Derrick Henry. They have Justice Hill. They draft a guy like Kamani Vidal here. And then when Keaton Mitchell comes back from his ACL injury, you can kind of move him into the Vidal role and take him, and Vidal can be the fourth guy. And Mitchell can slot back in. You have that three-headed monster again. So I like taking a running back in that spot. And then Jacob Monk, the guard from Duke, is my pick at 248. He has versatility, can play both center and guard. So I guess if you want him to be your backup center, you could have that for him. But he's super physical. Has a mean streak, honestly. Ravens love those guys. He's athletic and, again, get out into space on pulls or whatever you want to do from him. So two offensive linemen in this draft for me there. I thought this was solid. Again, the combine, you're looking for traits, looking for athleticism, right? There's a lot of things that go into it. But you have to also balance it out with what are your needs and are you getting, overall best player available. Baltimore loves every single strategy. They love taking best player available. We've seen them do it time and time again, but they're obviously not going to necessarily completely ignore need. Not that they haven't done it before, but this is a really deep draft in a lot of different areas. I felt like I hit on it pretty well. But coming up in the final part of the show, we'll get into a couple of brief Ravens notes and then also dive into your mock drafts on Twitter. I'll try to get to as many as I can. Be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. How's your social battery right now? Is it drained? Is it bursting with energy? There may be a couple reasons why it's at that level. Maybe it's because something like you're less social in the winter. I know for me, I'm a warm weather person, so I'm a much happier person, more energetic person when it's warm out. It can be easy to ignore our social battery, though, and spread ourselves thin, especially with social gatherings picking up after the winter. What's the right amount of socializing for you, and how do you recharge? Maybe you thrive around people, and maybe you just need some more alone time. Therapy can give you self-awareness to build a social life that doesn't drain your battery. And therapy has so many benefits, such as learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself, and it isn't just for those who experience major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, get BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a free questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday edition of the show. As always, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me that you're making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Again, we're free and available, so you don't have to, no money involved. It is free all the time here on Locked On Ravens. If you hear us on YouTube in video form, thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe, hit that like button as well if you're enjoying the content in audio form. Also, if you're enjoying the content, you can hit the subscribe button, hit the follow button, turn episode downloads on. Really appreciate that. Again, 5 days a week plus bonus content of Ravens news and everything relating to the team. So before we get into our mock draft bonanza, we're going to do that. But let's first start off with just a couple of points about the Ravens that were put out. We're actually going to talk about this more in depth tomorrow. Jeremy Fowler and Dan Graziano of ESPN put out an insider article, and in that article, the Ravens were mentioned. They first mentioned that a couple of scouts have named Michael Thomas as a great fit for the Ravens, and the Ravens is a great fit for Michael Thomas, and then that's a pairing that could happen, and also said that the Ravens are not likely to re-sign Odell Beckham Jr. So a couple of hits dropped in there, a couple of notes dropped in there. Very interesting, I'll say about that. It doesn't shock me the Ravens aren't likely to re-sign Odell, first of all. And we'll get into more of this more in depth tomorrow. But I essentially think what happened is the Ravens, I like the 6 wide receiver rule. Right now they have 4 guys on their roster. It's Rashad Bateman, it's Zay Flowers, it's Tylan Wallace and Nelson Aguilar. I expect the Ravens to sign an outside veteran in free agency. I expect them to draft a guy. So what I think happened is the Ravens chose between Odell Beckham and Nelson Aguilar, and they chose Nelson Aguilar. Now, that might not be what happened. Maybe Odell does come back, right? I'm not ruling out the possibility. This is just a rumor and kind of talking points right now, but it does not shock me. It feels like Odell probably won't be coming back to Baltimore. Now, the Michael Thomas aspect of things, I mean, it's health. He's still talented, but it's been a health thing. I've kind of been on like the fantasy Michael Thomas comeback train for like 3 or 4 years now, and it's just like it hasn't come to fruition. I wouldn't hate it, but I don't necessarily think I'd like it either. Like I think that the Ravens could do better, and they should do better than Michael Thomas, even though, look, when he's been healthy, which has been not a ton, he's been one of the better wide receivers in the league. But again, you can't bank and rely on the health there. So that's where I kind of draw the line a little bit. All right, let's get into some mock drafts. We'll do a couple mock drafts on Twitter. Again, I will try to get to as many as I can. I can't get to all of them. I just do it in the order I see them. So I'm not playing any sort of favorites here, but I do promise I see all of them. So Michael McClellan, let's start with Michael. He says, this one was dumb, but I couldn't pass on Arnold. It's a pie in the sky and he drops a 30. So yeah, Terrion Arnold dropping a 30. Yeah, Michael, I don't think it's happening, but my saying, when the mock draft simulator gives it to you, you take it. So Terrion Arnold out of Alabama, he's there at 30. Patrick Paul, Houston offensive lineman at 62. Johnny Wilson, Florida State wide receiver at 93. Mekhi Wingo, defensive tackle from LSU at 131. Marshawn Nealon, edge from Western Michigan at number 134. Isaiah Adams, guard from Illinois at 164. Brevin Spann, forward, tight end from Minnesota at 226. And Nelson Caesar, 248, edge from Houston. Yeah, that top 3 there. Now, Johnny Wilson, I don't love Johnny Wilson as a prospect. I don't hate him either, but I feel like some of the intangibles in his game aren't going to translate over. I love the Arnold pick. Obviously, again, he's not going to be there at 30, but I love that he was. Patrick Paul is one of my favorite offensive linemen in this draft. I love Armarius Mims too. I think he's going to be awesome. I do like the needs-based picks here because corner, that's a need for them. Offensive lineman, offensive tackle, absolutely need. Wide receiver, they're going to need to take a guy probably. You get some edge guys in there as well. Now, tight end is not a need for them, right at 226 there. So maybe I'd replace that with a running back, let's say. But overall, I think this is a good mock draft here from Michael. Let's get into one here from War Ready, who has the Ravens actually trading back. I can't see the actual specifics of the trade here, but TJ Tampa, the corner from Iowa State, is picked at 50. Trey Benson from Florida State is 53. Patrick Paul at 62. Devontae Walker, wide receiver from North Carolina, or Tez Walker, if you want to call him that, at 93. Christian Mahogany, offensive guard from Boston, at 131. Tyler Davis, defensive tackle from Clemson, at 134. Christian Jones, tackle from Texas, at 164. And Brandon Jackson, edge from Washington State, at 248. So Baltimore essentially gets 2 picks in the 50s for their pick at 30. I don't hate that value, actually. I don't hate that. I like the TJ Tampa pick. I know 53 for a running back might be a little early. I think Benson's awesome, but I think there are other prospects you can get a little later and then maybe take, I don't know, you can take an edge at 53 if there's a guy there that works out a bit better. I don't hate the Benson pick. I just think there's more positional value there. But other than that, I love the Patrick Paul pick. Tez Walker is going to be awesome. I don't think he lasts till 93. Then you round out the offensive line with a couple of late picks there. This is a really solid one. I do like this one a lot. Then we'll get to one more. What's the one that pops up, right? Ravens Rule 13 here comes in with Jordan Morgan, offensive lineman from Arizona, at 30. Braylon Trice, edge from Washington, at 62. Will Shipley, running back from Clemson, at 93. Itano Ladapo, 131, safety from Morgan State. Jermaine Burton, wide receiver from Alabama, 134. Keith Randolph Jr., defensive tackle from Illinois, 164. Austin Reed, quarterback from Western Kentucky, at 226. And Jackson Mitchell, UConn linebacker, at 248. Morgan, Trice, and Shipley. Those top 3. Morgan, I think, is awesome. He's one of those offensive linemen that is expected to go in the first round. 30 seems like a pretty solid landing spot for him. If he doesn't go to there, wouldn't be shocked to see him fall into the early second, but I still think he even has potential to go earlier than that. Trice lost some stock at the combine. I think actually it's more realistic he now falls to Baltimore at 62 than it was before the combine started. I love Will Shipley. He's explosive. He's electric. I think he's what the Ravens need. Will Shipley is one of my favorite running backs in this class. I love Shipley. I talked about Jermaine Burton earlier. Love Jermaine Burton. Oladapo's maybe a Geno Stone replacement. You can maybe play him in the slot too if you want to there. An underrated part of this, though, Ravens Rule has it, taking a quarterback at 226, do the Ravens invest in a late-round quarterback pick here? I don't know what their plan will be with Tyler Huntley being a free agent. Malik Cunningham, they did sign after the Patriots ended up, they signed him off the Patriots practice squad. So we're going to see. I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens actually do take a later round quarterback to kind of throw into that competition room. We're going to see how it all plays out there. But I do like this one from Ravens Rule. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Again, really appreciate everybody for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form. You can find me on Twitter at ChaosStricker34. Also, Instagram, we're building up that community. You can find me on Instagram at ChaosStricker34 as well. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens content. Stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.